Today I decided to give you guys an updated ranking of the Evil Dead franchise. This is a series of films that started in 1981 and is ongoing to this day. So without further ado, here's my updated list of the Evil Dead franchise. Coming in at number 5 is Evil Dead Rise. The fifth entry into the franchise is unfortunately my least favorite of the franchise. That's not to say it's a bad film, and I actually rather do enjoy it, but it really can't hold a candle to the original 4. I do like how they changed up the setting and put it into a high-rise as opposed to a cabin. Well, the opening scene's in a cabin, but that's just the very beginning of the movie. And overall, it is an entertaining and fun entry into the franchise, but I do have to admit that it does lack a little bit of that punch of the remake and doesn't get quite to the comedic heights of two or three. But it is a new and an interesting, refined version of the formula, and one that I actually rather enjoy. Coming in at number 4 is 1987's Evil Dead 2. This film was actually moved down one spot since my last ranking, but I still do love this film. It's not quite full-blown horror, and it's not quite full-blown comedy. It's like a mix of the two, and that's what's so unique about it. I do prefer my Evil Dead to kind of lean one way or the other, and this was like a happy in-between. A very fun and enjoyable film, and it's a classic for a reason. You can't go wrong with Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn. Moving up a spot on my list is actually 2013's Evil Dead. This film was essentially just a high-budget remake of the original film. It is technically a sequel because it does acknowledge the original film very briefly, but having said that, it's a pretty damn interesting continuation of the franchise, and one that I wish would be continued upon in some way. I really do like the character Mia, and unfortunately we don't see her again in the 5th film, and she's not really mentioned in the Evil Dead TV series. So unfortunately the buck stops here for Mia and her story. I really do like Jane Levy in the role, and I think she was great. This film was over the top, crazy, violent, gory, and like I said, I hope one day we can see something of a continuation, maybe a crossover with her and the aunt from the 5th movie. Check this movie out. It's very entertaining, and it's a wild ride. Coming in at number 2 is 1992's Army of Darkness. I really do love this film, and I think it's just very imaginative and one of the most unique films that I've ever seen. I really do love the comedy aspects of the film. It definitely leans more towards comedy than the second film, but it fully commits to that. Whereas the second film felt like a kind of a horror comedy, this one's a straight-up action comedy that leans very much into the comedy with some slight horror elements, and I think it's just a blast. This is actually most people's least favorite of the original trilogy, at least from what I've seen, but this one's damn near my favorite. It's not quite my favorite, but it's close. I just love the adventure. I love seeing Ash go back in time to try to stop the Army of Darkness and help people out in medieval times. It's just a really fun, crazy adventure, and I think this is probably my favorite portrayal of Ash from Bruce Campbell. I absolutely adore this movie. You cannot go wrong with Army of Darkness. And if you haven't seen it, you really are missing out. And you should really check it out, because you're going to have a good time. But nothing can beat my absolute favorite of the franchise, 1981's The Evil Dead. Released in 1981, and having an official release a couple years later, this film is just one of the best horror films ever made. It shows a group of friends going to a cabin in the woods where all hell breaks loose as they get possessed by evil and turn into demonic entities one by one. You really cannot go wrong with this classic, and it is one of my favorite horror films of all time. The film was low budget, and it's very amateurish at times, and that's kind of what makes this movie so damn good. It really was the first film that Sam Raimi ever made, and you could tell he was just a young and inexperienced filmmaker, but he had a vision, he had passion, and it really shows in the final product of this movie. Even though some of the aspects of the film are a bit dated, such as the effects being a bit wonky here and there, and some of the acting definitely leaves something to be desired, that kind of adds to the film's charm in a way that just can't be recaptured in modern-day horror films. The film is truly a masterpiece, and it's one of the best and most gruesome horror films of the 1980s, and you really cannot go wrong with The Evil Dead. Well, that's my updated list. I hope you enjoyed it. I don't own the 5th film on 4K or Blu-ray yet, but I do plan on getting it eventually. And I really love all the films in this franchise. There's not one bad entry. The TV show is great. The movies are great. The video games are all great. It's just a fun time through and through. The films are definitely not for everybody, and I do admit that they can be extreme and gruesome and even a bit goofy. But if you're a fan of that kind of thing, I think you'll love the Evil Dead franchise. I thank you all for watching, and peace out.